So this video is a summary of everything in families and households. It's obviously quite a lot, but I'm trying to condense it in the least amount of time I can, so this is good for last minute revision, so I hope you like it and give it a thumbs up. So topic 1 is couples, and domestic violence is a subtopic in this. So sociologists have said how it is far too widespread, and the Women's Aid Federation said it accounts for on average a quarter of all violent crime reported, and it doesn't occur randomly. Coleman and Osborne found that 2 women a week, or 1/3 of all female homicide victims, are killed by a partner or former partner. And there's a significant gender gap, so more women are subject to this than men, and Welby and Allen say women experience it much more. Official statistics, Shire says 35 assaults on average before someone will make a report on the domestic violence, and Cheadle says it shouldn't, that the government and the police don't interfere as much because they see the family as a private sphere and it shouldn't be interfered with. So there's 2 explanations for domestic violence. The first one's radical feminists, and they say the family is an institution to women's oppression and domestic violence is an inevitable feature as it preserves the power of men. However, Eliot says that this isn't true, as not all men are aggressive, so it's far too deterministic. The materialist explanation, Wilkinson and Pickett, it's caused by stress caused by inequality, so such as worries about money, which is more likely to be caused by women who are in a lower, or men who are in a lower social class. And Ansley agrees, as she believes women are takers of shit caused by capitalism. So the domestic division of labour, so Parsons said there's expressive and instrumental roles. Expressive roles refer to what the woman should be, so it's like a housewife, and she's accountable for all the housework, and instrumental's the breadwinner, so usually taken by the man, he says, and it's so the family has an economic person bringing wages in. Bott says about joint and segregated conjugal roles, so joint is where the couples share tasks such as housework and childcare and spend their leisure time together, but segregated conjugal roles is where the couple have separate roles, and they don't do leisure things together and spend it separately. Young and Wilmot say about the symmetrical family, so they say women now go to work, but this might be part-time, so it's kind of coming more equal but not yet fully. Men now help with housework and childcare, and couples now spend their leisure time together. However, the feminist view, so Oakley claims Young and Wilmot exaggerate and found 15% have a high participation in housework. Are couples becoming more equal? So the March of Progress view, so Young and Wilmot, the symmetrical family. Gashuni says women work full time, it's more likely to bring an equal relationship, but both feminists say that men do 8 hours compared to women doing 13 hours of housework. And for children's responsibility, Dexon Ward said that when the child is sick, only 1% of fathers look after the sick child, and Ferry and Smith said 4% took responsibility for childcare. Duncan and Marsden say about the triple shift, so that accounts for housework, paid work and emotion work, and quality time normally falls to the mothers, which is what Southerton says, and now the work in this is becoming more complicated. Paul and Vogler say about the allowance system and pooling system, so the allowance system is where they give them a certain amount which the wife can spend on things like food, clothes, and pooling's where these are shared, like the access to money share. So Egel says about very important decisions such as moving house is more likely to be taken up by the male. Important decisions such as where to go on holiday, that's normally decided by both, sometimes more the female, and less important decisions like food shopping is more likely to be chosen by the female. The personal life perspective, Smart found that lesbian and gay couples attach no meaning to who controlled the money, so they're saying that because they just trusted one, it wasn't anything to do with gender obviously, so they're being too deterministic on if the man that controls the money, they're being controlling, but some couples may be happy for that way. I think this is likely to come up 1 year anyway, and it's explaining the gender division of labour. So there's the cultural explanation and the material explanation. So Gashuni says parents who had more equal relationship were more likely to have one themselves. Manu Khan says younger men do more domestic work. The British Social Attitudes Survey found that under 10% of under 35s agreed with the traditional domestic division of labour. And Dunn found that lesbian couples had more equal relationships, and this is because there were no gender scripts to conform on. Arbour and Gin said better paid middle class women can buy labour saving devices to reduce housework. Khan said every 10,000 more a woman earns, 2 hours less housework she'll do. Ramos said if the woman is the breadwinner and the man is unemployed, they either do equal or she does more housework, although he's unemployed. And Sullivan found that working full-time rather than part-time made the biggest difference. Okay, so there's cross-cultural differences in childhood. So in some countries there's a responsibility at a young age. So you can link to Punch's study in Bolivia, which found children as young as 5 were expected to make a contribution in the house and even work. So there's less value placed on children showing obedience. So there's Verthinter-Capia, which he found that it wasn't expected for a child to conform to what the adult says, and it's more they can decide whether to listen or not. And children's sexual behaviour, so Malinowski found that among Trobriand Islanders, they took an amused interest towards their sexual explorations. Childhood as a social construct, so there's historical differences. Airy says childhood's inexistent and they were seen as mini adults, and he did this by looking at paintings, etc. And Shorter found that high death rates meant among the infants meant there was less attachment and more neglect because there was no knowing if they were going to survive or not. Globalisation, welfare agencies imposed with the norms of Western cultures. So where children have to work at a young age, this is seen wrong in Western culture, so they'll do things to try and solve the problems, but which they might not consider as problems. The modern cult emerged from 13th century schools, clothing and handbooks of child rearing. And it said that by the 17th century, an upper-class boy would be dressed in an outfit reserved for his own age, so this is when the distinction started to happen. Reasons for changes in position, so laws disallowing paid work, compulsory schooling, so you can refer to the Compulsory Schooling Act of 1880. Decline in family size, so this means more attachment to the child, and laws as well, so the 1989 Children Act, and also laws specifically for them, so no smoking or sex is allowed for 16 and 18, depends which one. The future of childhood, so Postman says that childhood is disappearing and it's becoming similar, so things like clothes, they're more like adults now. And he blames it on the information hierarchy, so TV blurs the distinction between that children used to not be able to know what things are happening because they couldn't read, but now TV doesn't have a limit, so they can have whatever information they can get from that TV. So postmodern, Jenks says relationships between adults and children are more important as the family becomes unstable, so they now are fearful of their child's security, so there's this greater surveillance, so because they know the child is going to survive, they're not going to have problems. So the next topic has the position of children improved, so much of progress as children are more valued, better protected and better educated. There's now a child-centred family and less children means more resources. Palmer refers to childhood now as toxic childhood. So rapid changes have led to damaging children's physically and emotionally, example junk food and computer games. The conflict view, so there's inequalities among children. So, for example, poor mothers are more likely to have a low birth weight babies, which is linked to delayed physical and intellectual development. Children of unskilled manual labours are over 3 times more likely to suffer hyperactivity. Children born into poor families are more likely to die in infancy or childhood and fall behind in school. So there's inequalities between children and adults, so neglect and abuse, so there's 20,000 childline calls a year. Children's space, so 25% of children are allowed to walk home on their own from school, and this is compared to in 1971 where 86% of children were allowed to do this. Children's space, I've already done that one. Children's time, so they can choose when they sleep, eat. Children's bodies, how they sit, what they wear, and they can give them food to make them fat, skinny. Access to resources, pocket money given by parents, so they're restricted in what they can get. Age patriarchy, so now as a result of there being more dependency on the children, there's more, dependency on the adults. It means that obviously adults are now completely superior compared to children. The new sociology of childhood argues we must take the perspective of the child, not childhood. Smart says the new approach must include children's views. So theories of the family. So the functionalist perspective on the family. So Murdoch says there's 4 essential functions now. So there's the stable satisfaction of the sex drive, reproduction of the next generation, socialisation of the young, and meeting its members' economic needs. And there's criticisms for this. So feminists see the family as serving the needs of men and oppressing women. And Marxists argue that it meets the needs of capitalism, not those of the family members of the society as a whole. Parsons says there's a functional fit, so the nuclear family provides a geographically and socially mobile workforce which is needed since there's an industrial society. But now there's a loss of the functions. There's still 2 irreducible functions, which are the primary socialisation of children and the stabilisation of adult personalities. The feminist perspective on the family. So liberal believe that it's becoming more equal and they accept there's progress. So that's the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975. Marxist feminists say women perform several functions for capitalism. They reproduce the labour force. They absorb anger. So Ansley says they're takers of shit. 3 is that they're a reserve army for cheap labour. Radical feminists believe men are the enemy and family and marriage are the key institutions for patriarchy, and that men benefit from women's unpaid domestic labour. Difference feminists say it assumes that women are in a nuclear family and not everyone has similar experiences and neglects black women's racial oppression. So the Marxist perspective on the family, so they believe the family is the purpose for the inheritance of property, so it ensures capitalists earn the means of production, and this is through monogamy said by Engels, and it became essential to ensure that their children would inherit from them. So if they've got a business, their children would get that instead of it being lost. Ideological function, so Zaretsky says that the family offers a haven but says it's an illusion, so women are oppressed but this isn't shown. A unit of consumption, so advertisers urge families to keep up with the Joneses, so that's an expression to say keep up with the local technology, etc. And it targets children with pest power, so they get what they want, so they purchase things from the capitalists. And the personal life perspective on the family, so it criticises the other theories as they presume the nuclear family is the dominant family type, and they are all structural theories and ignore how people have choices in creating their relationships. And they say how relationships such as fictive kin, so aunties, like that means, so if your mum's friend you call your auntie although she isn't blood, and friends who you might call sisters shows how the family is beyond ties of blood and marriage. And donors conceive children, so Nordqvist and Smart say it's difficult feelings happen, and it's between like people saying that they look like you, this could create problems because it's obviously not them. Alright, so there's quite a lot on demography. I'll start with deaths and come back to ageism. So this is reasons for why there's been an increase in the the decline in death rate really. And so there's improved nutrition, so McKeown says that this is accountable for up to half of the death rates, because it's increased resistance to infection. Medical improvements, so vaccines and the introduction of the NHS in 1948. Smoking and diet, so Harper says that smoking is the most There's awareness that it causes illnesses, stopped people smoking so they don't die. Public health measures, so the Clean Air Act after 4,000 died in the smog in 1952. So there's other ones like social changes, so after Margaret Thatcher got rid of mining, so there's less dangerous occupations. Class, gender and regional differences include Walker found that in poor areas of England they would die on average 7 years earlier, and those living in the north and Scotland have a lower life expectancy, and women tend to live longer than men. Births, so reasons for the decrease, so changes in women's position, so they have more chance to achieve, and Harper says this is the main part of why they've become able to not just have babies and marry. So there's a decline in the infant mortality rate, so in 1900 15% infant mortality rate, so 15% died before their first birthday, and it's fallen because of improved nutrition, better knowledge of hygiene, etc. Children are now an economic liability, so it's a lot of financial problems could be caused from having a child, and now there's child-centeredness, so it's now quality not quantity. And effects of changes in fertility, so there's a dependency ratio created, public services, so schools aren't as needed, and there's a smaller family size. Migration, so the population structure, how it's affected it. So there's a net migration of 260,000 in 2014, so increases the population size, and non-born UK mothers have a total fertility rate of 2.21 compared to 1.83 of UK born mothers. Age structure, so directly immigrants are generally young, so their average is 31 years compared to UK born, which is 41, but indirectly it kind of increases because they're fertile, they can have more children, so this kind of contradicts it. And the dependency ratio, so immigrants are likely to be of working age, so lowers it, but have more children, so this is counteracted. Okay, I'll come on to ageism. So modern society, older excluded from paid work, so economically dependent on their families or the state. Phillipson says how old are no longer of use to capitalism as they're not productive, and therefore they don't support them. Postmodern society, Hunt says that we now can choose our lifestyle no matter what our age is. This results in the range of services available like anti-aging products and cosmetic surgery. The media now portrays positive aspects of elderly lifestyle, so like age-saving creams and stuff. So there's inequalities among the old, so middle class have higher pensions so they can have a better retirement. And policy implications, so Hirsch argues that policies will need to change as there is an ageing population, so they have to move out of the house so younger people have bigger houses available. Globalisation and migration, so globalisation is the idea that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected as a result of the growth of communication systems and global media. So the acceleration is the increase in migration. The United Nations said between 2000 and 2013 there was a 33% increase in the amount of migration. Differentiation, so there's different types of migrant. Vertevex says there's a wide range of countries and causes super diversity. And Cohen says there's 3 types of migrants: citizens, denizens and helots. I've done another video on demography, so I'll tell you anyway. Citizens have full citizenship rights. Denizens have a privileged foreign nationals welcomed by the state. And helots are the ones who were exploited and a reserve army of cheap labour, so they're unskilled and poorly paid. So there's been a feminisation of migration, so most migrants used to be men, now women. Ehrenreich and Hochschild, so care work and domestic work, so working in a care home for the elderly, is increasingly done by women from poorer countries. Migrant identities, their origin provides an additional sense of belonging, and transnational identities. So Erickson says globalisation has created diverse migration patterns and created movements through networks rather than settling. The politicalisation of migrant identities. So assimilation is what it used to be like, and people were kind of expected to adapt to the culture of the country they'd moved to. Multiculturalism, so it accepts cultural identity. So Erickson distinguishes shallow and deep diversity. Deep diversity is arranged marriages, which they don't accept at all. And a divided working class, so they blame migrants for social problems. And Kastler's and Kozak benefits capitalism and stops union actions, so everyone's against the minorities, so they can't create a union and take action of being exploited. Okay, so the next topic is changing family patterns. So divorce has increased because changes in the law, so decline in stigma, secularisation, rising expectations to marriage, women's increased financial independence. So the feminist explanation is Hochschild said the home compares unfavourably with work. Modernity and individualisation, so Beck and Giddens say traditional norms have been lost. So the meaning of the high divorce rate, New Right thinks it's undesirable, so there's more lone parent families, which they obviously don't like. Not obviously, but you know, they're a bit of weird people. Feminists, so they're desirable as women are breaking free. Postmodernists and the individualisation thesis. People have freedom and choice. Functionalist remarriages show commitment. Interactionist Morgan says we can't generalise about people's experiences. And the personal life perspective accepts divorce can cause problems, but it has been normalised. Ethnic differences in family patterns. So black families, 51% of black families were lone parent, and most were matriarchal. And Mirza says this is because the value that black women have on their independence. Asian families, Bangladeshi and Pakistani families tend to have 4.4 or 4.3 on average per household. And Ballard found extended family ties were important in migration among the Asians between the 1950s and 1960s. And the extended family today, so Charles found that it was all but extinct, and Wilmot believes that it's now a dispersed extended family. The Beanpole family, so Brannan describes it as a long and thin, so it's kind of like it doesn't go horizontally, so like with your aunties, but it goes vertically, so grandparents, and this is increased as people live longer. Obligations to relatives, so Finch and Mason found that 90% of people had given or received financial help and half had cared for a sick relative, although this was more expected of females. Partnerships, so changing patterns in marriage, so there's change in attitudes, secularisation, decline in stigma to alternatives, so like cohabitation, same-sex marriages, civil partnerships then. Changes in position of women, remarriages, age of marrying is now later and less church weddings, which links to secularisation, and because they don't tend to marry divorcees. Cohabitation, so the decline in stigma, no financial security needed by the woman, and secularisation. Shelton and John found that many intend to marry who are cohabiting. Same-sex relationships, Stonewall estimates 5 to 7% of the population were same-sex, and Weeks says it's friendship as kinship, so they can choose who they think is their family. So there's an increase in one-person households. So this is because there's more people getting divorced, people are marrying when they're older, and also living apart together, which is when you're in a significant relationship but not living together. And some do this because they want to keep their own home or believe it's too early. Parents and children, childbearing, 47% of children are now born outside of marriage, and the average age of a woman having their first child is 28.1 years old. It's changed because there's a decline in stigma and women have more options. Lone parent families, 22% of all families with children, so 90% are matriarchal, and this is because they usually get custody, nature roles, and men are less willing to give up work. I think this is going to be the 6th marker. Murray, a dependency culture with perverse incentive. So they're being rewarded for their irresponsible behaviour, as Murray says, and this makes people more likely to be dependent and creates this dependency culture. And step families, so 10%, Ferry and Smith say that there's good involvement with childcare, but they are at greater risk of poverty. And reasons for patterns, so more women bring their children into the new step family, and this is because they have more custody. They support children from other marriages, especially for the men, and there's a lack of clear norms regarding the family type. Okay, so topic 6 is family diversity. Postmodernism and family diversity. Stacey says that postmodern families have greater freedom, and this has benefited women, and a new family structure called a divorce extended family has been introduced. And the individualisation thesis says Giddens and Beck will say that they are now free from traditional roles and we can choose to live our own lives. And Giddens says about choice and equality, and contraception has meant that it's allowed sex and intimacy rather than reproduction, and this has obviously created the pure relationship. And women have gained independence as a result of feminism and greater opportunities for education and work. The pure relationship, so when they stay together for their own happiness, and he believes same-sex relationships based on choice rather than traditional roles have kind of like helped create their own families that they want. Beck, the negotiated family. We now live in a racist society and there's no roles to conform by because there's greater gender equality and greater individualism. The zombie family refers to it appearing as a haven of security but is insecure, and it can't provide this feeling of security that it's meant to. The personal life perspective, so what does that stand for? The individualisation thesis exaggerates how much people have. Budgeon says that traditional limits are still apparent. The connectedness thesis says Smart argues that we live in a network of existing relationships that influence our options. So gender, women get custody, men are better paid, and Ines Dotter argues lesbians feel they must remain in the closet, which shows that this isn't a greater freedom, although the norms have changed. Modernism and the nuclear family, so functionalists linking back to Parsons and functional fit into essential functions of the nuclear family. The new right, so nuclear family is the correct family type. They argue that lone parent mothers can't discipline their children, they have no role models, especially the boys, and they need more benefits as they're poorer. Benson argues that family is more stable when married. However, Oakley argues that there are cross-cultural studies which show variations in roles, so not biological roles, which means that they think it's the biological roles that women stay at home and men go out to work, but studies over the world have shown that this isn't the truth, really. Chester, the neo-conventional family, most aspire to be in the nuclear family, and most adults marry and have children, and there's remarriage, so they haven't given up hope of the commitment. And the Rappaport, so there's types of that diversity. There's organisational, so how the family is organised, so what the woman does if they're dual learners, whatever. Cultural, so if they're in a different culture, quite an obvious one. Life stage, so the family structure differs according to the stage in the life cycle. Generational is when they have different attitudes dependent on their generation, and it reflects the historical period which they lived in. And social class, so that's just your class you're in and how this would affect your family structure. Okay, so the last topic is families and social policy. A comparative view of family policy. China's one-child policy, so they have to seek permission to get pregnant, and they have to pay a fine if they do have more than one child. Communist Russia, so restricted contraception and abortions, so they could have a really big amount of people in the country. Nazi family policy, so racially pure, they wanted to breed a racially pure race. So restricted contraception, restricted abortion like Communist Russia. And the democratic societies, so the family is a private sphere and the government don't want to intervene with it when it goes wrong. The functionalist perspective, so the state acts as interests of society and it has benefited everyone. Fletcher argues that the introduction of health and education has led to the development of the welfare state and believes this has obviously helped everyone, which it obviously hasn't. Donzelot policing the family. He sees policies as a form of state power and control over families. He shows the importance of medical knowledge as a form of power and control, so he says that doctors are used to kind of do this. Feminism. Land argues that they pressure the ideal family is, they presume the ideal family is the patriarchal nuclear families. So policies that support this are lack of affordable childcare, so if they do want to go out and work, they have to pay a lot of childcare. Caring for the sick and elderly, so this is obviously not provided for as much by the government, if at all. So it normally falls back to the woman in the family, as they tend to have to look after the elderly relatives, and tax and benefit policies. Gender regimes. So Drew says there's familistic and individualistic gender regimes. I don't know how to say this word. It's like familistic. So that's kind of, it's an example's Greece, and they don't have policies to help women. It's kind of presuming that the patriarchal nuclear family is the prominent type. So Greece doesn't have childcare. So if a woman wants to work, she has to rely on their family. Whereas individualistic gender regimes are things like Sweden, where childcare is provided for by the government, which encourages them to go out to work. So she believes that EU countries are moving towards greater gender equality. However, new policies introducing childcare aren't cheap, and it's difficult to be introduced because the question lies on who should get this free childcare and where the limit should be, which can cause a lot of arguments. So the new right element says laws make divorce easier, undermine the lifelong commitment. Civil partnerships sends a message that heterosexual relationships aren't superior. Maybe they're not. And tax laws. So it's outdated, that thing, though. It's just, if it does come up, just say tax laws. Murray said there's generous welfare benefits, and this encourages young girls to go get pregnant, and fathers will abandon responsibilities towards their children. Their solution is to make cuts and deny council housing to unmarried teen mothers. However, Abbott and Wallace argued that cutting benefits would just make them even poorer. So the new right's influence on policies, so the Conservative government, which was Margaret Thatcher, they banned promotion of homosexuality, but against the new right, it made divorce easier. New Labour, so they agreed that parents should be responsible for children, but examples like longer maternity leave, and the New Deal, which helped lone parents get back to work, and working families tax credits, enabling parents to claim some tax relief on childcare costs. This went against the new right. And the coalition government, so that's more recent. Hayton says there's the modernisers and traditionalists. And modernisers are those who recognise that families are now more diverse and are willing to reflect this in their policies, and the traditionalists who favour a new right view and reject diversity as morally wrong. Okay, so that's everything. I don't know how long this is going to be, but my voice is dying since I decided to do it all in one. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you find it helpful. If you have any comments, I'm so tired. If you have any questions, just comment, and well done if you made it all the way through. Thanks for watching.